Welcome back to Science Hub. My name is Marian Bănică, and today we are going to talk about innovation in education. My guest, Stephane Matillon, is an open source developer, and today we will have an open source approach about innovation in education. Good to see you, Stephane.
Good to see you too. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I want to talk with you about innovation in education. It's a very hot topic. Everybody is interested in education, but not everybody knows about open source solutions that can be used by everyone of us. Firstly, just to introduce a bit our audience to the topic. Everybody knows about Wikipedia, but not so many people knows about MediaWiki. What can you tell us about MediaWiki? In very few words.
So MediaWiki is the software that's behind Wikipedia. So Wikipedia is just a brand, but MediaWiki is the actual software that you would use, I don't know, Word to type documents. Everyone knows letters. Well, I guess everyone knows Office as well. But MediaWiki is very much the software.
Mm-hmm. So, but on the other side, MediaWiki can be used also to develop your own knowledge base, right? Not just Wikipedia.
Yes, pretty much. You can build pretty much any wiki. I mean, MediaWiki has wiki in it, but it doesn't have Wikipedia. So you can have wikis for internal consumption. Like lots of companies use it to maintain their knowledge base. But you can do also wikis if you're a fan of Pokemon or movies, whatever. I mean, wikis.
Mm-hmm. So you can have also your own Wikipedia on a topic that you like the most, yeah, using your basic.
This is very much the case. Lots of people do.
Okay. On the other side, not too many people are familiar with the fact that you can have also an offline version of Wikipedia. What you can tell us about this?
So that's what Kiwix does, and that's how we started. Basically, Kiwix, the name, actually, none of us is related to New Zealand. We get the question quite often. But we started because we wanted to have an offline version of Wikipedia that could work in environments where internet wasn't good or even non-existent. So the two co-founding developers, one was in France, but family was living in the countryside. It was like late 2000s. And the other one was actually in Mali. And for different reasons, like internet wasn't good where they were, and Wikipedia was taking off. They were like, okay, we need to have that resource just for consumption. We need to have it available offline, like so that we don't have to, click on the link and then wait 20 seconds to get that content, and then it takes forever. So that's how Kiwix started. Wiki goes Kiwi and Kiwix as a nicer name, and that's how it went. We had the technology that basically harvests the website, reproduces the structure, and compresses it into a single file. Concretely, that means that you can have the entirety of Wikipedia on your phone without internet. Like you download it and then you're done. You can click, and do the regular Wikipedia thing. You're starting to look for, I don't know, your hometown of, Bucharest or Tokyo, and you end up with like the Greek philosophers or quantum mechanics. That's the full thing. Because the tech is there, we can do any website that's on the internet, and that's what we actually do.
But do you need access to the database?
So we have access to the database. We have a farm, which is a bunch of robots that crawl the web and harvest websites, much like any other does it to some extent. But for the users, what we found out is that yes, you obviously need to have at some point a way to access the internet, but you only need one person to access it, because what you do is that you download a file, a single file that you can then share with your friends. So we have many use cases actually, where there's a point of download, let's say in Europe or in South Korea or the US, and then people travel and they deploy in schools, in rural education centers, in refugee camps. We will have people that use it in Antarctica that distribute it in North Korea. So in Antarctica, they fly every year, I think, when it's spring over there, and they bring a new version of Stack Overflow or a new version of Wikipedia on Kiwix. And in North Korea, it's actually a little more subtle. They just smuggle through the Chinese border, they put Kiwix and Wikipedia, Korean Wikipedia on flash drives along with movies and, like normal things, and they lose them on the street so that people would find them, put it on their computer and find out about the actual outside world. So basically, someone has to have access to the internet, but not the end user.
Mm-hmm. So basically, you can have all the knowledge that the humanity has in a single flash or in a Raspberry Pi without having internet and still having everything you need, basically, right?
That's pretty much the goal. Our mission is to bring educational content for free to anyone who needs it and that doesn't have internet access for whatever reason.
But how do you see education? Because nowadays there are a lot of researches, and I still think that the information is still not available for everyone. I mean, you can search about a topic on the internet, on YouTube, or any other resource, but still to understand that content, it takes a lot of time, much more than reading a normal book. How do you see this? The fragmentation of information.
I think that is one problem that we are not addressing directly as Kiwix, because, and I want to be very clear on this, we do not do education, we provide educational tools, meaning that we will harvest whatever website, YouTube, channel, videos, whatever is needed for someone to actually do their job on the ground and spread knowledge. We just provide a tool. So it will depend in the end to who as the agency or who wants to do what with our tool. It's a very open source thing. You have your software and then you reuse it as you want and as you like, but the end result is yours.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the technical details, just to understand everyone. Okay, what do you need in order to run such a farm of let's say wikis in a single drive?
Okay, the Kiwix project is actually two projects. So there's the OpenZim, which is centered around the format. So we have tools and servers which are pretty large. Some of them have been hosted in universities, for instance, or even at the Wikimedia Foundation. And those, they are not your public type. And then there's Kiwix, which is the browser, offline browser. And that runs on pretty much any platform. So if you have an Android phone, a Mac, Windows, Linux, server, Raspberry Pi, Kiwix runs.
So basically you make a zip of everything and after that you run it in an offline browser, right?
Yeah, pretty much. It's not exactly a zip because a zip you need to unpack, whereas a zim file with an M actually is highly compressed. Much more than a zip file actually, and it can be read on the fly. So there's no lag. You open your file and off you go, and then you switch. You open another one. If you go on Wikipedia, you go to Stack Overflow. You can read it. There's no extra step. We really want to be access to information to be seamless for the end user.
Mm-hmm. Just tell us, it works also with other tools than MediaWiki, or it's just focused on this? Or can you tell us that if there are other tools that can be similar to what you provide on other technology?
So in our case, we're not solely focused on MediaWiki. We started with MediaWiki, but we also have a YouTube scraper. We can do WordPress. We can do pretty much any website. We actually have a tool that's in the works that's called Zimit, and which is public and open source, and where people simply enter the address of a given website, and then it will spit out a zim file of that website. So we can cover pretty much any scenario. In the offline world, however, I don't think there are many solutions. I'm actually not aware of any solution that is as universal as Kiwix, because usually people take the problem differently than we did. We were like, okay, we don't know anything about education, but other people do, so let's make sure that their solutions are available. And then created the OpenZim project, which takes content that already exists somewhere and makes it available to people who wouldn't normally access it. Other people usually they focus on a format because they have a given problem. They say, okay, I want to teach them math, and therefore I need to build a software that does math offline or whatever. we didn't do that approach. We, equal opportunity distribution.
Yeah, but on the other side, also from Wikipedia, you can create basically you can decide what articles you can put in your book. Let's say it's called even book, and after that you can export. You can import in Kiwix, and after that you can have your own basically a sum of articles that are specific to your need. What can you tell us a bit more about this functionality that maybe not everybody knows quite much, and it's very useful?
It's very useful indeed. So initially there used to be an export function on Wikipedia where you could select articles and you get a PDF file, that you could print and live with. Now there's a tool that's called Wikipedia On Demand, which is a bit more sophisticated, and that's managed by us, where you actually select your files, or you can select an entire project. Say you want everything but geography, then you select the geography project on Wikipedia, and it will export all the articles related to geography into a single zip file that you can put on your phone or computer, and then you will browse Wikipedia, but only that narrow portion or very large portion of Wikipedia that you have selected. We actually started a project with medicine, because there was demand from an ER physician that were like, okay, Wikipedia, in English, it's like 5 or 6 million articles, but there's 50,000 of them that are actually related to medicine. And because I'm a physician, I'm only interested to that 1% of the corpus. So I want that to be extracted so that I can look it up and it doesn't hog the whole space on my phone. So we started with this, and then we're like, yeah, but maybe people are interested in other topics. So Wikipedia On Demand was born out of that scenario.
So what can you tell us about the success, or how do you see the Wikimed? This is the name of the project with the medicine.
So Wikimed is actually quite a big success. It has about 500,000 users, I would say, worldwide. It's the largest medical encyclopedia there is, and it's now available in 12 or 14 languages. I know Ukrainian was added last month. But there's also like French, Arabic. Arabic is the second largest because there's lots of people in the Middle East that do not have a good internet connectivity, so they use it a lot. But French, German, Japanese, pretty much any wiki that is large enough to produce medical content is within our sites. So we add, as various Wikipedias grow, we add more languages, also depending on requests.
What are the primary challenges faced in providing offline access to the web content that you discovered during the development of this tool?
So there's an old challenge and there's a new challenge. The old challenge was that because we focus on educational content, there's the copyright part, obviously. Not every educational content is freely licensed, like Wikipedia, so Creative Commons or Open Education or whatever you name it. So we can only share a part of educational content that's out there, even though we sometimes negotiate with content owners. And then there's a huge imbalance between what's available in English and sometimes French and what's available in other languages. So 80% of our users are in what's called the Global South. So Africa, South America, South Asia, East Asia. And for someone to access knowledge, yes, of course, in lots of these regions, particularly in India, for instance, lots of people do understand and speak English, or in West Africa, they speak French, but it's not exactly the same as having content in your own language. And those resources are still missing. Like, people don't have the reflex to say, okay, I'm actively participating in this dissemination of knowledge, and therefore I'm putting this under a free license. So we try to reach out. Sometimes they're like, oh yeah, I didn't think about it, and then it's cool, but sometimes they just don't respond because whatever reason. The other issue, the more recent issue, is actually due to the rise of AI. What has happened over the past couple of years is that you'd see crawlers like from OpenAI and others that would go around the web, crawl content, and they've been using it, to train their LLMs. And then they would set up a business, which is OpenAI, which is very successful and very, very good. But the original content owners, they'd be like, yeah, use my content to train your machines, but what do I get? I'm actually losing traffic because OpenAI is answering the question, and people don't need to come to my website. So they started to put protections like Cloudflare and others that block any and every crawler. So people like us, we have nothing to do with AI, we're still being blocked. We don't have access to those resources, which we could access like a year ago. So that is a challenge. We don't know yet how to address it. We're working on it, but it is making our life a lot more difficult.
Mm-hmm. So basically, can you tell us a bit about the open source approach that you decided to have? Basically, you are working mostly with open source solutions, open source tools. So everything you do is open source. Open source, it means that you have access to the source code you can use on your own, and you can redistribute the code and the content without any problem. Tell us a bit more, because you have a lot of experience in this field, and I'm quite sure that most of the people thinks that just the commercial solutions are very good, even if from my experience at least, open source are even better sometimes, because they are developed by a lot of developers with a lot of experience and with a very good standardization of the code and also of the content, of course.
Yeah, I think you hit the right point by talking about standardization of the codes, because essentially what we do, we address people that cannot afford commercial solutions. So I had a guy, it was like 5 years ago, who said, yeah, Kiwix is doomed. It will never work because in 5 years' time, everyone will have access to the internet via satellite. Maybe he was planning on, Starlink or something else, or even Google's Loon. But what he forgot is that, 4 million people, they would like to have the internet, but they cannot afford it. So there is no commercial solution to that issue. Our case, open source, was a way to say, we cannot be present in 200 countries at the same time. Yet there are people in 200 countries and more that do need internet content right now. So let's put it out there. It's open source. It's free to use, share, and distribute. We don't want to control it because we cannot anyway. And that's when it picked up. Like otherwise, we'd still be pushing a whole little solution by sending Twitter feeds and so on and on. And no, we have a solution. Everyone is able to use it for their own purpose. We don't tell them what they need, and that's exactly what they did. They took it and they used it for their own purpose. And we have we went in 5 years from less than 1 million to more than 10 or 12 million users worldwide. And we're aiming at 100 million users. And by default, you see a lot of platforms that are offering offline content, and by default, they're actually running zip files. Like at Kiwix, we don't actually care that it says Kiwix on the box. If you use the OpenZim format, then that's good enough for us, because that's the mission. That's the good thing about the way we approach things. We're more happy about having a large standard that helps everyone, no matter what they want to do with it, than anything else.
So basically,
and of course, that brings a lot of volunteers, developers. That helps with code.
Yeah, tell us about the volunteers that are involved in the project and how you manage to work with them, because not everywhere it's very common to invest your time as a volunteer in developing something that everybody else is going to use.
I think it's a project that is very rewarding in a way, because it helps people outside of your own little circle. We do get the usual volunteer, which is, okay, I encountered a problem, I'm a developer, so I will fix it myself and then I will help. That is great. That is awesome. Then we have a second type of volunteer, which are more like students. They need to build themselves a CV, if you will, because if you're a student developer, then having gone to a good school is good, but at the end of the day, a recruiter will look at your code. So contributing to an open source project is a great way to show that you actually know what you're doing. So we get a lot of those, and we did do a significant effort into building a bunch of repositories where onboarding is clearly an objective. We document everything. We label the issues as good first issues, so that it can be onboarded more easily. The hard ones are labeled differently. we make sure that anyone that knows coding but doesn't know Kiwix can get into it and then have fun. It's also important, I think, in open source to not grind away at just like solving bugs, but it's also better if what you do is meaningful and has impact. So we do try to communicate on what it does, on what Kiwix does down the line. So our volunteer base is pretty broad. We have people from Google, but we have also like, random 19 years old kids from Arkansas or India.
Mm-hmm. So having fun seriously, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Tell us about the educational impact, which is a very important aspect of what you are doing. How do you think that you impacted the education on a global scale, particularly in regions where the internet is limited? I can tell you also a bit about of my experience. I'm using your solution when I want to go out of the city, and I still need to have access to some articles that are important for me. I'm just taking them, and it's like a digital detox, reading a lot of articles, but having no kind of disruption from, let's say, internet or chat or Facebook or other tools. How do you see this impact that you have on a global scale? So it's a global solution.
Yeah.
And especially in the regions, because there are a lot of regions, and I have friends also in Africa and also in other countries where internet is very weak.
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. We've been a little overwhelmed by the impact we've had, because when we started, it was Wikipedia, and then, we had a couple of use cases, mostly like rural schools in Africa, and we're like, that makes sense. We can build Kiwix for those folks, and that will work. But then every day, we actually get people with different use cases. The first year we started Kiwix, actually, we set up a basic contact at kiwix.org email address, and you could see it from if you were looking at the credits in the app. And we got, I think the first year, you get random emails from people, this doesn't work, or I have a question, whatever. So we got about 8,000 emails over the year, which isn't that much for any company with like more than 1 million users. But about 5% of them were thank you. Like people writing saying, thank you for bringing this, because I didn't have zero access before, and now I can actually check out resources. So that's very, very, very rewarding. It's not everyone, I don't think many people get thank you emails for their work. So that was quite cool. More generally, the impact we're having really depends on who's doing the work down the line. So we provide a tool again. We provide a tool which has educational content. What people do, and those are pretty cool, they run schools in refugee camps, but we've also seen people in prisons, not only in the south, not like middle of nowhere, Saharan desert, but in the US, there's quite a bunch of organizations that are preparing inmates to go back to a normal life. And what they do is train them to learn to code. But if you're in prison, obviously you don't have access to the internet because you're in prison. So what they do is that they use Kiwix, and they have resources like FreeCodeCamp, like Stack Overflow, even Wikipedia to get the basics of algorithmics or math or whatever. And then they use Kiwix, those tools, that content, to teach inmates to become developers. There's a huge shortage of developers, and those guys, they get a job as soon as they leave. They get selected on the fact that they can understand what's going on. They have their training for the last 2 or 3 years of incarceration, and then they're released and they become good citizens. So to me, that's a huge impact. That's an amazing impact. You change people's lives.
Yeah. Basically, they can use very properly that time they spend in jail, right? In teaching themselves, not just trying to escape the jail. Yeah?
Exactly.
Yeah. Could you share a specific success story or case study where you did a very big impact or significant difference, not just in jail, but in an educational setting where basically access to other kind of resources, not just internet, is very limited.
So yeah, there's the present thing, which I'm very happy about. But of course, the schools are the big ones. We have a big partnership with Libraries Without Borders. So those guys, they come very much like, Doctors Without Borders. They come to refugee camps or regions where there's an educational crisis. There's not much infrastructure, and they have those big ship containers that they refitted, and you unfold the container, and it turns out to be a full library where kids can learn to read and they can learn to play, actually. And because it's a ship container, it's big, but it's not that big. So you have books, but you also need tables and chairs and whatever. And you also have a little box, which is Raspberry Pi based, and tablets, like cheap Chinese tablets, which are enough to connect to a hotspot. And they have Kiwix on that. And they have the resources that they need to pursue and to work on the education of those kids. So they reach quite a few people. I think they're active in about a dozen countries, if not more. Starting with Jordan, but also in Burma, in Central Africa, if I recall correctly. So they're a bit everywhere, and that's the kind of story that, makes me feel good about what we do, because at the end we produce software, but when you see the box, the actual container, you're like, oh, okay, that's big. And then you see it with people actually using the product, that is great. Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a bit much more about the open source community involved in this project. How do you engage people in developing open source solutions, and how do you see the future of open source software from now on?
So engaging them usually is like, hey, you came to fix this, but we're cool, we got cookies, why don't you stay longer? And we need help, and we try to make it a community. I think you can come to open source because you have your own project and you're on it, and that's fine, but if you come on the late into a project, I think you need to feel welcomed about it. So we really try to make it a community and try to be helpful. And we try to get them young, so it's very important for us to go out and get to students and be like, okay, you're in your third year, you're just starting to know how to code, but open source is actually a good way for you to be a good developer, because you will learn a lot more than by hiding what you're doing or by being in a hidden environment. So we're trying to push that approach. Long term, I think open source will always have a funding issue because everyone uses it. But I think it's also built in the culture. There's a lot of free riding. Like, I'm using that product, it's open source, so I'm free to use it. And if it's there, they don't really need my support, they don't need my funding. So that is a problem. Particularly like if you have large companies, they actually use the product and don't pay back. We have a rule at Kiwix, which I actually got from the guy at MetaBrainz and MusicBrainz. I don't know if you know that tool is an open source product, I would say, that's behind most of the music recognition programs. They have a library that is crowdfunded of like, okay, this song has this type of music and this type of lyrics, and then Spotify or whoever else uses it as part of their service. So that's very open source in nature. And the guy told me, you know what, have one rule of open source. If the guy I'm talking to is wearing a tie, then he has to share and he has to pay. Otherwise, everyone is free to use it. And I think it's a good approach. So open source should, of course, like ties are kind of like getting out of fashion, so it will be harder to spot them. But I think for open source, the way forward is to clearly say and name and shame, saying, okay, you're a company, you're building a product of my open source product, I'm super happy for you, but then you're getting free labor and that's not right. And you need to be named and shamed on that. Otherwise, you're having fun, you're a small guy, middle of nowhere thing, you use my product and I think that's great, and keep me posted, send me postcards, that's good. So really two different approach for two different populations.
Mm-hmm. But on the other side, you have a lot of, let's say, juniors or students that are coming and they are doing a project. After that, they are leaving. How you still keep the quality of the code and the full project itself to work and to...
I think, at the beginning I was very disappointed with students coming and then leaving because They came for instance, like Google Summer of Code is a very great, it's a great project, but they come for the internship, they get Google on their CV and then they leave. I was like, okay, that's sad. But then I think they learn something and they learn to code, they learn to be part of the community, and we make sure that the selection process is not like bring us your coolest project ever. It's more like, okay, make some PRs, make some pull requests, comment your code, and answer questions. And for a student, it's the basics, and someone need to teach that to you. So we're happy with that. There'll be new students every year anyway. So they come and leave, but they've learned something from us, and I think that's important.
Mm-hmm. There are tell us a bit about the developing process behind an open source solution. Basically, the tools that you are using or other software that you are using and so on, just to be easier for all the others to understand that it's not rocket science, let's say.
Oh, it's not rocket science at all. The tools we're using, so I made a count last year, and I think we're using like between 30 to 40 different sets of services, like cloud-based services, starting with GitHub, for instance, where our code is, but then servers. And I think there's something for everyone in there because every single environment is different. So if you know Kubernetes, that's definitely something we need. If you know C++, then that's something we need for the backend, but then the front end would be Vue.js, JS, or CSS, like, even very basic things. So we use pretty much everything that's out there, and in a sense, it is also a danger, because what I've seen in a lot of open source projects, and we're definitely guilty of that, is feature creep. It's always nice to get a new idea and a new project and a new feature, but at the end of the day, and that's something I try to make sure that we're very much focused on, it's the end user. Maybe the end user doesn't need a new button. Maybe the end user just needs to have something that works and never crashes. Of course, it's less sexy, but it's a lot harder. Having an idea and getting a proof of concept is fairly easy. But actually getting it to work and feel like magic, that's a lot harder. And that's something we strive to get. We want magic.
Mm-hmm. So open source is not magic, but with some senior developers and some project managers as you are, it's easier and everybody can be involved in a way or other, no matter what.
It's a lot easier to do magic when there are lots of people looking at your code and making sure that, that small mistake you couldn't spot, it's been spotted, than when you're all alone and under a rush of a deadline by your manager, then, okay, that will do it good enough. We'll hack it or something else.
Yeah. Let's talk about digital inclusion. It's a topic that I like very much because at this moment there are, on a part, there are developers with high, standards in using digital tools, but on the other side there are users with very limited skills on using the digital tools. How do you see the contribution of Kiwix, especially in to people that are not very familiar with software development or are just using the technology and they are just enjoying and that's all?
Yeah, I think there's a bias, and I was also guilty of that it works on your phone and it makes all sense. But what we forget is that we grew with that. The first smartphones were, iPhone was 2007, so that's already 15 years ago, 17 years. So we've actually grown, we haven't realized, but we grew into using apps, downloading and sharing and making sure that it works or not working. We have people that have smartphones. Smartphones are actually quite cheap, and there are more smartphones that could connect to the internet than people connected to the internet. And that's important to keep in mind, because that means that people have access to apps, but they don't have that progression into learning how to use the internet or internet content. And I know this because we basically have, I would say, two major sets of users. there are users that do have access to the internet, but they use Kiwix because for some reason they cannot access the content that they want to access. And when I say some reason, more often than not, it's censorship. So we have like 20% of our 10, 12 million users are actually Chinese. And those guys, they have no problem accessing the internet. They have a problem accessing Wikipedia. They have a problem accessing other websites. So they do use Kiwix, but you never hear them. Like this year was the year where we had the most comments from Chinese users, and it's because there was a bug in the search bar. And it was like 10 guys. They get it. They know it works and blah, blah, blah. And then you got users that never had access to the internet. Like, you know, Kiwix is their only connection with the outside world to some extent. And in that case, you realize that what you take for granted is not obvious. So we get a lot of requests from Cuba and from Yemen, for instance. Those two countries are in the top 5 of our user base. And those guys, they don't know what to expect. So they have approach to using the app that we didn't think about, because the user experience or the user interface has problems. I'm going to be blunt there, but Kiwix is definitely not as good as it should be in terms of user onboarding, because, well, we have limited resources, and also I'm going to be doubly honest there. We have tons of very good developers, and the tech is awesome, but it's like open source really needs to make an effort into UI. Like open source likes designers, because, you know, it's a cultural issue. But when you ask a developer to make some design choices, they would suck, and that is sad. But we learn from that. We learn because we were confronted with people that literally went from zero to the internet in space of 5 minutes. They didn't grow into it. So that is the main learning. I think the impact in terms of digital inclusion is that we bring people to the internet a lot faster than they normally would. And there's a lot to learn for them, but also for us.
Mm-hmm. Could you tell us, or could we discuss a bit more about any other initiatives or projects aimed to expand the knowledge or educational resources in regions with limited access to even knowledge, not just to internet?
I think there's a lot of thinking that has been going on lately as in, okay, one size fits all, it's good to get started. But then the more use cases you encounter, and the more you will try to adapt and probably fork at some point your content or your approach. So you have groups that simply do the basics. Okay, here's Wikipedia, here's the internet, how it works, here's LibreOffice, and you can build your CV, and you can start writing letters for your documents, and that's digital inclusion, because those are the documents you need to, wherever you are in the world, at some point you will be confronted with the administration. You will need to write a letter, and having a good free software office document writing system that we can reuse is important. So inclusion is very broad. And then, when I spoke earlier about Wikimed, we realized that, okay, education is broad, and you don't know exactly who is going to need what. So we took that approach of saying, okay, let's just identify general topics, and whoever needs it, because the good thing is that as we grow, we can industrialize our content deployment. And what I'm saying here is that we're building dictionaries. We're building dictionaries of time, because everyone at some point needs to understand, what does that word mean, and they will find it on their phone. They don't need to access the internet in order to do that. But also, like recently, currently, there's the Africa Cup of Nations. And we were like, hey, why don't we build a football encyclopedia based on the Africa Cup? So you have an app that allows you to check out the past results from each team based off Wikipedia. It's like publicly available. And we get feedback saying, you know, I was in that stadium, 50,000 people trying to connect in Ivory Coast to connect to the internet at the same time, it just doesn't work. So I was happy shooting the shit with my friends, if you pardon my French, and I get all the content I need because we're having a very important discussion about football, and I want to share that knowledge. And to me, it is sharing knowledge. Of course, it's football. I hate football, as a matter of fact. But I'm very happy that people will be using Kiwix and will be able to access knowledge that they need at any time. So really, use cases should not be limited at like 20, 60 kids sitting in a classroom. Knowledge should be everywhere and anytime.
Yeah, so basically you can use this tool also for having the full Wikipedia, but also having a very small project on very specific topic that is very useful and so on. I think that from my perspective, this should be a tool that you should address more to the local authorities or even to local governments in order to put everything that they have in a single place, and after that everyone to be able to access everything that is needed. And I think that also this approach should be done also in some countries in Europe, in Eastern Europe in particular. Tell us a bit more about if you know about other projects that you worked with in order to make your tool better, mostly on the educational background. Did you work with other open source projects in order to solve any specific issue?
We're part of a group that's called the Offline Consortium.
Offline?
Offline Consortium. So
okay.
Offline Internet Consortium, I think is the full name. The idea is that offline internet is there to stay, and we need to better collaborate. So everyone has a different approach to it. So folks from Libraries Without Borders are part of it, but also Arizona State University. I mean, there are folks from all around the world, and different approaches, different techs. Some are more into the deployment side, some are more into the building side. There's also Learning Quality and Colibri, which builds a whole curriculum for K-12 schools. Essentially, I think it's good to have an ecosystem. And because all of us are very much geared towards open source, the competition isn't there to hide what we're up to, but it's more towards learning what everyone just found out. So information circulates a lot faster. New ideas come a lot faster. There's a couple of projects related to localized AI, so a small LLM that you can store on your phone, and that will, like, if you train it just on Wikipedia, it will answer like Wikipedia-based questions, but it will be stored locally. So that's something that I was like, oh, okay. I didn't think that was possible, but that's something we started working with because of those discussions within the Offline Consortium. In terms of education, however, I think it's very fragmented. It relies a lot on the goodwill of someone who's been to a place or who comes from a place and say, okay, I will solve this place's issue. So we have small projects, for instance, in the Himalayas, where a lady, for some reason, she decided to settle there, and she's building schools where she's teaching kids to learn English so they can get a better job down in the valley. But she's teaching them and she's showing them actually Wikipedia about their region, and they're like, oh, okay, well, the whole world knows about us. That's kind of cool. So it drives them towards learning. And I get stories from all over the place, like from islands in the Pacific to Central Africa to India to the Andes. There's also a couple of students for their project in Ecuador. They went and they refurbished old CRT screens, the big TVs from 20 years ago. They were being discarded because the whole country was moving towards digital. But they were like, oh, we can actually put Raspberry Pis in those and distribute them in communities. And they have a community center where folks can access dictionaries, offline resources about news, things in Aymara and Quechua on that small Raspberry. And that's kind of cool. I think that anyone can start a small project, and sometimes we find out about it maybe 2 years later. They come and have a question. Oh, by the way, I'm running 20 schools in Tanzania. can you help? I'm like, yeah, sure. So it's a bit everywhere. It's a lot of small-scale projects, and I think this makes for lots of very cool stories.
Mm-hmm. If I'm an educator, how can you, how I can help your project, and how you can help me in order to deliver better the educational content to my students?
I think the first step is to come to us and say, here's my problem and I need this. And I've already identified the solution. So here's a website, here's a YouTube channel where the guy is explaining exactly what I want to explain. Here's a set of resources that I would like to be able to distribute on tablets, on phones, have a little network. So if you come with a beginning of a solution, then we can work on something. Again, Kiwix is not a solution, it is a solution provider. So you need to, if you're an educator, you come to us. Maybe it's already out there what you need. We have a pretty big library in 150 languages, so maybe there's already what you need, and then just keep us posted on like, okay, I'm using this in this country, this place, this many people are working. This is cool. That is very, very nice, and we don't ask for more than that. If you do have a specific project in mind, then it's actually even better, because then we know what to build. I'll be more concrete. I'll give you an example, maybe. So until a couple of years ago, or when we started Kiwix, we were like, anything on the internet is fair game as long as it's freely licensed. So mostly educational, but we would take anything. And then we started to have more and more requests from people wanting to learn coding. So we actually are building and spending a fair amount of resources on making sure that all those coding, learning resources out there, I'm talking Scratch, I'm talking Free Code Camp, even like Stack Overflow, those are available for that segment of the population that wants to learn software development. Because in that case, they came and said, okay, I'm trying to learn, here is a website that works, that would work for me, but I can't access it because I don't have internet access, so please help us. And then we could help, because our job is making content offline. Our job is not to say, hey, you need this.
Mm-hmm. So, in conclusion, do you recommend to students to get involved in open source?
Oh, yeah, definitely. That's the best choice they could do. It's the best, it's the easiest learning because there's no pressure. Like open source is very welcoming. You do, you do. You don't, you don't. But it's a good way to learn code. It's a good way as a student to get free advice, free developing advice, and also at your own pace. So if you don't like to go to class at 8 in the morning, it's okay, you can code at like 4 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon and still get someone to comment on the PR and tell you, okay, you need to do this and this and that, and you get good practice. I think it makes you a better developer because you just learn to work as a team. And I don't think there's any job out there where you don't need to work as a team. Like if you're only yourself, then you probably just won the lottery and nobody cares. So I would strongly recommend any student that's learning to code to find a project that they like or that they enjoy the purpose. It could be anything. It can be like very obscure or very grandiose, and I'm reaching out to tens of millions of people. It doesn't matter. You have impact, but you have the most impact on yourself. You learn to code and you code well, or better than you would by yourself.
Okay, thank you very much. It was a real pleasure to have you as a guest. I hope that at this moment we are able to understand better that there are a lot of solutions, not just Kiwix, but also other solutions that are coming with a lot that are solving a lot of problems in a very innovative way, and also in education, where I think is the most lack from my point of view. I hope that you enjoyed also our video cast. Thank you very much. And if you have something to conclude our video cast, you have your final word.
Well, thank you very much for having me again. It was very pleasant. I'm very, very happy to speak about open source, generally speaking. So what I actually discovered in the late. So it's not only for students. Any grown man can actually learn to love and practice open source. And I encourage everyone to try and look around and support.
Good. Thank you very much. My name is Marian Bănică, and I hope you enjoyed another session of Science Hub. Thank you.